Okay, let's start. Good morning or good evening to all, and welcome to the Data-Driven Community virtual meeting. My name is Ronen Arieli, and I'm honored to host this meeting today. Some word, who we are, who are we? The Data-Driven Community manages two branches, a weekly meeting of the Cloud Data-Driven User Group, like today, and an annual conference called Future Data-Driven Summit. So regarding the next week meeting, on August 3, we will host the DeFi GOG-ORI, and we will discuss about performance in Azure SQL database. The Future Data-Driven Summit 2023 will be held on September 27. It's 5 tracks in parallel, 10 hours, 53 speakers. The registration is open. I will add the link in the chat, and if you are fast enough, you can scan the QR. Don't miss the conference. This is the big event of the year. Please use the chat during the session for questions and discussions. I mentioned before the meeting started that this is a user group. It's not a lecture. So it's a gathering meeting, and if you have questions, you can ask in the chat. And even if you see other people questions or want just to add a comment, you are more than welcome. For the same reason, you're also welcome to use reaction to show that you like something, or to clap hands virtually whenever you hear something that you love. Today we are hosting Iuliana Tuhasu. I'm not sure I pronounce it well. Iuliana is a senior data engineer. She is well familiar in the data community. She speaks in global conferences a lot and user group around the world. She has experience in data integration, data warehouse, big data analytics, and a lot more. So, Iuliana, you are welcome to share your screen, take control, and maybe add some words about yourself as well.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Glad to see so many of you here.
Share your screen. We don't see your screen yet.
Let me know if you see it.
Okay, I can see it now. Great.
Okay, great. So today we'll talk about Azure Data Factory tips and tricks. But before we start, I will tell some things about me. So my name is Iuliana Tuhasu. I'm based in Bucharest, Romania. I'm passionate about data. I have 8+ years of experience in the industry. I'm Microsoft certified. And if you'd like to connect with me, I added here some links from LinkedIn, email, and also from my blog. From time to time, I will post a PowerPoint presentation and I will open Azure Data Factory just to demonstrate better each tip. I think we can start with the first tip. The first tip is related to pipeline dependencies. So what does this mean? When you jump in a project and let's say you are supposed to modify a pipeline, but you find there 100 pipelines. What are you going to do? You are going to check if that pipeline that you want to modify is invoked by other pipeline, because your change might impact other flows. I added here also an example, and I will also open Azure Data Factory just to show better this. So here I opened my pipeline, and under the Properties tab, we can see here a related one. Related one means that the current pipeline is invoked by other pipeline, in our case called nested for each loop. Let me open also Azure Data Factory. So let's suppose we open this pipeline and we go here under the properties and we see this related one, and we have nested for each arrow. This is the pipeline that calls current pipeline called loop hour folder. So this is the first thing that you do. Let me go back to the presentation. And move to the second tip, which is very related to the first one, to the pipeline dependencies. This one is invoke ADF pipeline from another pipeline. It could be because there are a lot of advantages, but because there are some limitations. Through the limitations, I can add the fact that if you need a nested for each, this is not supported in Azure Data Factory. If you want to create a for each activity, and inside that for each activity, you are not able to add other for each. And I will show this in the future slides. Apart from that, there are a lot of advantages to invoke an ADF pipeline from another pipeline. One of them being a modular and reusable design. This means that it's instead of having, let's say, 10 pipelines where you need to send an email when each of them finishes and to update some monitoring tables, why duplicating this when you can create everything into one single pipeline and invoke that pipeline. Apart from that, you will have workflow orchestration, meaning that you can have a master pipeline and you can call other pipelines. It's easier to follow the entire flow from start to end. And apart from that, you can run them sequentially or you can run them in parallel. And last but not least, it's very easy to work in a team because you have a modular design. Each team member can work on one functionality and at the end to bring everything in the master pipeline. But I added here an example and I will open also Data Factory for it. As you can see, you can drag and drop an execute pipeline activity. And from here, from this drop-down, invoked pipeline, you can choose whatever pipeline you want. Let me show you exactly. So we have this pipeline, and this is a copy data activity. And here we get some data from Azure SQLDB, and we generate some CSV files. And then we want to execute the store procedure that updates some monitoring tables, and we want to send an email. Instead of adding these two activities here and also in other pipelines, I have chosen to add them in a separate pipeline, this pipeline called exec store procedure, and then to invoke the pipeline in my current pipeline. So as I mentioned, I can choose whatever pipeline I want here in the invoked pipeline. Okay, let me go back to the presentation. Let's talk about the nested for each. As I mentioned, this is a limitation, but an opportunity to have a modular design. I will first start with this folder structure. So I will explain a situation. Let's suppose we have this folder structure with demo2, which is the root folder, the container. Then we have other folders, 2023. This is a folder that represents the year. Then we have 07, another folder that represents the month, 23, the day, 04, the hour. And inside the hour folder, there are some Avro files. And so on and so forth. We have another hour with another Avro files. Then again, a day with an hour with Avro files. And we need to extract this data. We need to get the data from the Avro files daily and to generate some CSV files, one CSV file for each Avro file. For the purpose of this presentation, and I assumed that the year, the month, and the day folders will always represent year, month, and day. So we get them from the parameters. The hour, we don't know exactly which hour we are going to have here. Maybe today we have data for 10 a.m. and for 12 a.m. and the other day for 5 p.m. So normally, To achieve that, we'll have a for each hour folder to get the Avro files, then for each Avro file to process and generate a CSV file. But in ADF, if we want to do that, we will see that the for each is grayed out. So here is a pipeline with the for each activity. And inside the for each activity, I want to search for another for each and to drag and drop. But that's not possible because Azure Data Factory does not support nested for each. This is the workaround. And I will pause this and open Azure Data Factory because it will be easier to understand and to explain it. Okay, so it's this pipeline, the nested for each Avro. First of all, we have a parameter to run for today. Then we have a get metadata activity with a dataset for our Avro file, some parameters for the dataset, year, month, and day. And we want to get from the get metadata the item name. This is for monitoring purposes. This is basically the name of the day folder and the child items. What we have in the day folders? We have the hour folders. Then we have the for each. In the for each, we have the output of the activity dot child items. So for each hour folder, what we do here, we call an execute pipeline activity. So we call a pipeline. What we do in this pipeline? First of all, before I want to show you exactly that this pipeline has also parameters, year, month, day, hour, where hour is the item from the for each that name. Here we have again a get metadata activity. In this get metadata activity, we have this data set with year, month, day, and hour. And we want the child items again. Because here we have the hour folder, we want to get all the Avro files under the hour folder. Then we set the path, and we have another for each. This for each is the activity get Avro files, the output of this activity, that child items. So directly the Avro files. And for each Avro file, we have this data flow with these parameters, file path, container, and finding, because we need them. And if I open it, this data flow processes the Avro files and transfers to CSV files. We have the source, we have some transformations, and the sink, which is a CSV file. This is how we work with the nested for each. Let me go back to the presentation. Just to recap, we have a get metadata to get child items of day folder. Then for each hour folder, we call a pipeline. And in that pipeline, we get the child items of our folder, the Avro files, and for each Avro file, we call this data flow that processes the Avro to CSV file. Let's move to another tip. Use parameters.
There is a good question on the chat. I will stop you from time to time if there are questions on the chat.
Sure.
The question is there any impact on performance on that nested for each solution?
A for each is a for each, but there is no other option when we need to do such things, because we don't have a for each in a for each. So that option basically does not exist. And apart from that, if we really need to do some transformations, then we need to have this structure to invoke another pipeline. In case we don't need to perform transformations, in this case, I had to do that, and I picked this example because it's an Avro file, and I want to generate a CSV file. If we have CSV to CSV and no transformations, then we use the copy data activity. and will perform automatically the recursive.
Okay.
Okay. Going back to the presentation, use parameters, global parameters, and variables. I will start first with some theory. What are parameters, global parameters, and variables? First of all, parameters are defined at pipeline level. So whenever we call a pipeline, or if we set 2 or 3 parameters and we set a value for them, that value won't change until the pipeline finishes. But in case of global parameters, they are constant across a data factory. This means that you can reference a global parameter from each pipeline. And you use the global parameters, especially when you have something that is, let's say, used by almost or all the pipelines that you have. For instance, the URL for a logic app or a link to a Databricks. Environment. This type of parameters, because they are global. In case of variables, the difference basically between a parameter and a variable is the fact that the variable changes when a pipeline starts running. So you need a variable to keep a value of something. Let's suppose we want to get the date and time in UTC format. Then I start the pipeline with some parameters now, and I get a variable for UTC now for this moment. Then I will trigger again the pipeline with the same parameters, and I will get another value for the variable. So values that can be set and modified during a pipeline run. I added here some examples on how we retrieve this. So for parameters, it's at pipeline.parameters.source container, where source container is the name of the parameter. For global parameters, it's at pipeline.globalparameters.sendEmail, where sendEmail is the name of the global parameter. Then variables, which is variables, parentheses, fallback. And I added also an example that contains parameters, global parameters, variables, but let me open Data Factory because it will be easy to understand. So in this pipeline, I define 2 parameters, the source container and the source directory, demo4 and input. Why do we need these parameters? Imagine that you don't set here the parameters and you set them in the activities, but the source container will change after 1 month from demo4 to demo5, and you have to open these activities and to perform the change. Afterwards, you need to test. You need to ensure that nothing else has broken, and so on and so forth. That's why having parameters, if the source container is going to be changed in 1 month from demo4 to demo7, we can change it directly from here. So this is the advantage. Now, let me explain a little bit what this pipeline does. So we have this get metadata to get the files under a directory. Then we have a for each to loop through these files and to get them. And in case the table exists in Azure SQLDB, we went to upsert, but in case it doesn't exist, we went to automatically create it from that file. So, for example, in the source, we have products CSV file and the vendors CSV file. If we don't have a table associated in the Azure SQLDB, then we will automatically create it. We have this option here. Otherwise, we will upsert the data, and I have defined here the ID. Then we want to send an email with the end date when the last file has been successfully processed in UTC time. And we have a variable for that. In this variable, I added the UTC now, and I used format datetime to format the UTC now in this way. Then we want to send an email. Here we have a web activity that uses a global parameter. This is the URL to the logic app to send the email. I will show you exactly where this global parameter is, but in this case, we use a global parameter. And we have also a message. Here we retrieve, here we retrieve the variable because we want to include it in the email. And let me go here. So under the Manage tab, we have the global parameters, and this is the global parameter. So we define here, it has a name, a type, and a value. It's the link to the logic apps. Wait. Let's continue with the next step. The next step is related to the lookup activity. We know that lookup activity is mainly used to retrieve a data set. But how about inserting, updating data, deleting data, or just creating a table? How we can achieve that with the lookup activity? And here is a summary actually, but it will be more interesting to show you exactly the demo in Azure Data Factory. Let me close this and we will run them together. So I have here a pipeline with a lookup activity where I want to create a table. And I have a source dataset, Azure SQL, and use query, and I added as a query create table demo with a column called ID of type int. I will open also my Azure SQL DB. I just want to refresh and ensure that there is no table called demo. Okay, we don't have any table here. And let's debug it and let's see what happens. It failed, and it failed. The specified SQL query is not valid. It could be caused by that the query doesn't return any data. So whenever we use the lookup activity, it requires to return some data. For some data, it could be only one line on one dummy line. Now let's check if we have any table called demo. And we have it, which means that our activity failed, but the table has been successfully created. But what if we want to make this pipeline succeeded? We'll go here, and here is a trick. Select one as ABCD. Let's do it like that. If I run again, we have the demo table here. So let's add demo 1. Then run in debug mode. It succeeded. And apart from succeeded, the table has been also created. Demo 1. So this is a trick. If you want to use the lookup activity for queries that do not return any data, just use a quick trick. But what if we want to create a schema? if we want to create a schema, let's follow the same process as we followed for a create table statement. Create schema demo and select one as ABCD. Let's first check that we don't have any schema. All demo. Okay, we don't have it. Let's run in debug mode. It failed. It failed with a different error this time. Incorrect syntax near the keyword select. And apart from failing, if we refresh the schemas here, we don't see any demo schema. When we receive this type of error, it means that we need to use dynamic SQL. And let me add this query, which is the same, but with dynamic SQL. We created the schema demo and also with the trick. And let's run again. Succeeded. Apart from succeeded, the schema has been successfully created. Okay, so let's get back to the presentation and do a quick recap. If we want to use this,
before you go to the presentation, two fast tips. One, from SQL Server 2016, you don't need to check if object exists. There is a simple query that you can use. It's called drop table if exist, and then you use the table name. So if it's not exist, it does nothing. If it exists, it will drop it. The second tip, if you are doing this a lot and you need to return some value and you are not sure that you will remember to add the query select one at the end, the trick is that you can simply create a trigger in the SQL Server side, which will, it's called the DDL trigger. And then each time that you change something in the DDL, like schema, table, it's not matter, the trigger will return one or whatever you want. So you don't need to remember to put it.
That's very nice. And for the drop, yes, definitely I should have used it. It's also used in the store procedure. So yes. Thank you very much. Okay, so just a quick recap. In case we want to add a create table statement in the lookup activity, the table is going to be created, but the lookup activity will fail. And the workaround is to do something, maybe this or with what Ron suggested, so that the query returns some data. It could be only one row. In case of the schema, then if we use the trick, the schema will not be created and the lookup activity fails. Therefore, we need to use dynamic SQL. And the schema will be created and the lookup activity will run successfully. Let's move to a second tip, which is enable isolated development and testing without impacting existing work. This tip is related to disabling activities or cloning some pipelines. To disable some activities, I will show you in the next slides, but let's suppose you have a pipeline with 10 activities and you want to test the performance of the sync, maybe, of a copy data activity and nothing else. You will disable the other activities and you will focus only on your copy data. This way you can measure the performance. Then again, you can have a pipeline with multiple activities and you want to perform some changes. You can disable the other activities. You can work on your single activity. And this way you ensure that no mistakes are made. Apart from that, we have this very nice functionality in ADF to clone a pipeline. Cloning a pipeline means that you will have the same, you'll have a copy of any pipeline that you want. And this way, you by doing that, you have a lot of advantages. You can perform some ad hoc changes. Let's suppose that you have a new requirement to transfer a file to a path that where you need to add just as a folder, a backslash and the name. You don't want to affect your production pipeline, so you clone it and you run it just for that specific ad hoc data transfer. Apart from that, you can benefit for the parallel development. You can develop something, then your colleague can clone your pipeline and continue from that point on. You can experiment a lot because you want to start from something. You want to start from the production pipeline, but you don't want to make mistakes or to change something and then to ask yourself, what if I change something that was very important and how I can resume my work and so on and so forth. You clone your pipeline and you can experiment and improve as much as you want. Apart from that, it's very nice for training purposes. You just clone it and you can remove activities. You can add other activities without affecting the real pipeline. And I added here an example, how to disable an activity. Well, you have this activity state, which is active or inactive. When you check this inactive, it shows like this, it's grayed out. It's the same behavior, maybe some of you worked with SSIS, it's the same as enable disable task. When you set this inactive, then you can mark the activity either as succeeded, skipped, or failed, which means that in the monitoring tab, you will see it, or when you run it in debug mode, you will see this status, but your pipeline, your activity is disabled. So active, and it looks like this, inactive, and it looks grayed out. Then I added here how to clone a pipeline. Well, you just click on the dots from here. I will show you Data Factory because in the screenshot, it seems I haven't captured them. You have the clone, and if you clone pipeline 1, then the cloned pipeline will be pipeline 1 underline copy 1. This is how it will clone. The process is immediate. Okay, let's move to Data Factory. And I will show you this functionalities, maybe this one, inactive, and I can set here whatever status I want. Then I want to clone, let's suppose this pipeline, clone. And the process is immediate with underline copy 1. And that's all. And a quick trick that I haven't added in the slides, but it's a quick one, discard all changes to resources, because now I don't want to publish or save anything, so I will discard my changes for this clone. But this is the process. Clone, and it immediately gets cloned. Okay. Let's return to the presentation. Organize your pipelines in folders. If you have 100 pipelines, then it might be hard to find a pipeline that gets data from, let's say, Azure SQLDB and generate some CSV file to Azure Data Lake, and so on and so forth. it might be tricky to go through 100 pipelines. That's why we have this functionality. You can create a folder and you can organize the pipelines in folders. In this example, I organize them by category, by type of systems, source and destination, like lake to lake. It could be lake to database, database to lake, DB to lake, and so on and so forth. But this is based on your need. Let me show you exactly how we can do that. Okay, so we have this three dots, new folder. It could be new folder and it's created here. And let's suppose I want to move this pipeline one. I want to move to the new folder. This is how I can do it. Then I want to move back. And we have it here again under lake to lake. Okay. Let's move on to a new tip related to debugging. Always debug your pipelines before publishing. And first, let's discuss about how to debug a data flow. So, in a data flow, you are able to perform a lot of transformations. Here we have a source, we have a derives column and a flatten for transforming some data and the sink. If I publish directly the pipeline that contains this data flow, I may end up with some errors. Some errors, not build errors, but errors in the way I transform the data. But if I turn on the data flow debug, then I have this data preview, which allows me to see exactly what I have in the sink. Here, I have an arrow file, I have a complex type, and from a complex type, I want to translate to a flattened structure. So for me, it's great to see that I have here a flattened structure. Apart from that, I set a file path. It's great to see that the file path was correctly set. What if I forget to add as a folder and I transfer the file to another path that is used in other pipeline. So before publishing our work, is great to preview our data and to debug it, to have control on what we have developed. Apart from that, we have also this debug for a pipeline. The difference between a debug and the trigger is that when you trigger a pipeline, then it takes the latest saved or published version of the pipeline. For the debug, you can change it here because it takes the version from the editor. It's very nice because you can see exactly the input and the output of each activity, and you can check, for instance, if the parameters were set correctly or not. So you can troubleshoot with why I don't have data for yesterday. And I have some pipeline parameters, and the data set uses the pipeline parameters. And if I run it in debug mode, I can check, okay, so here is the mistake. Let me also show you from, so this is, okay. Let me also show from the data factory. So I will open first the data flow. This is the data flow. And before turning this on, I can go to sync and data preview. As you can see, please turn on debug mode and wait until the cluster is ready to preview data. So I will turn this on with 1 hour debug time to live. You can choose it 1 to 4 hours. Let's wait a few seconds. Okay, Now let's refresh. Okay, so we have a preview of our data. Exactly how I added in the screenshot. Now let's try to debug the nested for each. So I will debug it. So I click here on the debug and I want to run it, let's say -4 days. And we have this output. We'll refresh it and we can see all the activities here. And for instance, the first one, the get our folders, which is succeeded, we can check the input. As I mentioned, the parameters. So it's 23. Okay, so it's correctly set. And we can check the output. As I mentioned, because it's the same example that I used before, this is a day folder, and these are the child items. So we have 2 hours, 03 and 04. It's a good way to debug and have control on your development. Then for each hour folder, items count 2. Again, this works. There are 2 hour folders. Okay, so this one succeeded. We have the input, we have the output, which is a pipeline run ID. So this debug is for this pipeline. If we want to debug the next one, we need to do it again. Then we can check again the parameters, hour 04. So here we have our hour 03, and here we have hour 04. So it works as expected. Now I will return to the presentation because this is what I wanted to show. Okay. Another tip, when you are unsure about the input or output format of the activity, try running it in debug mode. Let's suppose you want to retrieve the error message from a pipeline and you want to insert that message into a table. You want to keep track of that. How you are going to achieve that? You are going to, so we have this pipeline and here we have a copy data. And as you can see, if it fails, then we have a lookup activity that will do this thing. In the copy data, we just get some data from the Azure SQLDB and we generate some CSV files. And we want to insert the error message, but we don't know exactly how the error message looks like. But what if I run it in debug mode and check the output? So I can run it in debug mode. This is the input, still in progress. Okay, let's check the output. In the output, we have these errors and we have the message. So it will be the output of this product activity that errors 0 that message. And we have it here. This is how we are going to retrieve it. Output errors message. This is a replace, so we can ignore it. So anytime we don't know what to retrieve, so let's suppose we want to retrieve the number of rows that were read or written. In our case, 0 because it failed. We have this data read. We don't know it we don't have this in the memory. We can check it and we will access directly afterwards. Okay. So I added here exactly the errors message and how we can get it. It's important to use the string. Okay, another tip is to create ADF pipelines from templates whenever possible. There are a lot of templates available in Azure Data Factory, and you can access them by following this path, pipeline template gallery. And let me show you exactly. So you have here pipeline. Instead of creating a pipeline, you can choose template gallery. And here there are a lot of templates. You can choose them by category, or you can just write something here. Let's suppose we want to use this pipeline, bulk copy from files to database. We will pick continue. What we need to do is to select the input. So we need the link service for this get metadata dataset. I will pick the storage account, then another one for the database. And I will use this template. This template is exactly the same with the one that I showed you here. But in this one, in this pipeline, I started from the template and I added some things on top. When you choose a template, you will have the parameters, but you have indeed to set the values. You will have the default behavior, like for instance, in the sync, you have the item.name with an insert. What I did in my example here was to change it a little bit. And if the file is products.csv, I don't want the table to be products.csv. I want to replace the CSV with empty to have a different name for the table. And I added here absurd instead of the default insert. So when you want to develop a new pipeline, first, it's a good practice to check if there is any pipeline that you can start from, because you can save a lot of time. Okay. This is the tip related to copy data activity. It's a good practice to use it whenever you want to move data and you don't need to perform complex transformations. If you need to perform complex transformations, like that one from Azure to CSV file, then you need a data flow. And for the copy data, I added here a scenario to copy some CSV files from demo container to let's say in the demo container, we have a structure. I will show you after this slide the structure to other folder, let's say output in the same container. And here we have a source data set. We have the container with something here. There could be a lot of folders and star.csv, all the CSV files. And as input, this is the input structure that we have. So we have a folder called 2023. We have the container input. Then in this folder, we have another one, 2023. Then we have 06. Then we have 16, 17, 18. We have days in a month. And in each day folder, we have a CSV file. Because we don't need to perform transformations, we just need to copy the file from this structure to another structure. It's recommended to use the copy data activity. However, the copy data activity comes with some copy behaviors. For instance, one of them is the preserve hierarchy. So under the sync, you will see this copy behavior. One of them is the preserve hierarchy. What does the preserve hierarchy do? So if you add the preserve hierarchy, it means that the structure, the folder structure from the source will be kept also in the destination. So if in the source we had demo input 2023-06-16 and the CSV file, then the only thing that is going to be changed will be the output, because we set it like that. We want in the output instead of input. Then the entire structure will remain the same. Then we have the flatten. In case we choose flatten, then the folder structure will not be kept. So the files will be directly transferred to the output folder. As you can see with the auto-generated name. So we had 3 files. We ended up also with 3 files, but with auto-generated names. And we have the merge file. The merge files, it merges all 3 files into one single file. It's default to have an auto-generated name. However, this is something that can be changed for the merged files copy behavior. So if we had 3 rows, 4 rows, and 5 rows in those 3 files, we'll end up with a merged file of 12 rows. If we want to have a specific name for the merged file, then we can just modify the dataset and we can add here the desired name. In our case, output.csv. And the output will be, the output file will have this name. Okay, let's go to Data Factory and see quickly this demo. Okay, so we have this pipeline. We have this pipeline and we have here the structure. So we have the input, we have 2023, 06, 16, and so on and so forth, exactly as in the presentation. And in the output, we have nothing at the moment. And in the sync, let's first run with preserve hierarchy. I will run in debug mode. Okay, it succeeded. Let's check the output folder, 2023, 06, 16, with the CSV file inside, then 17 with the CSV file inside, then 18 with the CSV file inside. So the same structure from the input was kept in the output folder. Now, let me delete this because I would like to run for flatten. Okay. So I'll go here and change it to flatten hierarchy and run again in debug mode. Okay, succeeded. As you can see, our files have auto-generated names and the structure is not kept. Let me delete them because I will run for merge. Okay. So for merge files, okay, succeeded. And as you can see, we have a file with an auto-generated name here. and it includes all the rows from those three files. I will delete it. I could have kept also because it will not affect. And here we have this dataset, DS person test. Okay, and I will give a name, let's say dummy.csv. And I will go back to my pipeline for the merge, and I will run again in debug mode. Extended. Let's refresh it. As you can see, we have the file renamed. Let's return to the presentation. And another tip is to set up code repository. In ADF, as in other projects, the code repository is very important. It's important to keep track of your work. It's important to ensure that you don't lose anything that you've worked on. And it's very easy to set it in Azure Data Factory. You can go here, set up code repository, and once you click this, a new window will open where you have to add the link to your repository and just connect with it. And afterwards, you have also from here a button to create a new branch and another one to create a pull request. So it's directly integrated in the interface. An important note here is the fact that the main branch is a collaboration branch, but every time you publish a pipeline, publish something, then we have this ADF publish pipeline that is automatically created, and it contains the ARM templates, the Azure Resource Manager templates. This is the these are JSON files and represents the entire structure, the structure for the whole data factory in JSON format. Let me show you from data factory how we can, at this moment, I have set the repository, but we can create a branch and perform some transformations. So let me discard all the changes from here and clean it a little bit. Okay, so I will create a new branch. Let's say feature branch, add new pipeline. It's based on main branch. Okay, so I created a new branch and I want to clone pipeline. Okay, when we connect to the with the repository, we have this option to save all. So we can save everything in our pipeline. Usually, if we don't connect the repository and we used to do that in live mode, I will do it again because I really want to show you this. And we clone a pipeline, or let's say not cloning, because this is not an example. We create a pipeline and we add here a copy data. If we want to keep this, I mean, we need to add here the source and the same, but we have the option to publish. If we publish, it gives an error. So let's say we add the source, but we want to add the sync later. We need to add it now and to publish. So this is the disadvantage, let's say. But if we use the repository, so we created this branch and let's say we clone this pipeline and we don't want to publish. We don't want to publish, we just save. It will be saved in our repository in the current branch. If we want to publish, we can also do that. Let's say, let me clone also this one. and save again. So we have one updating pipeline and one addition, and we click OK. An important note is that we cannot publish from this branch. We can publish from the main branch. So what we are going to do, we'll create a pull request. So this one redirects to Azure DevOps. So we need to add this add new pipeline, this branch, the files that are part of this branch, we want to merge into the main branch. And we can see here that we have this copy 1 pipeline and copy 2 pipeline. Added copy 1 and copy 2 pipelines. Usually there are reviewers, but in our case, we will leave it as is. There are now no branch policies. Okay, I will approve it and I will complete. So I merged the new functionalities into the main branch. If we want to check the main branch, as you can see, we have data flow, we have dataset, we have the factory, link service, and all the pipelines. So in case something happens, we can get it from the repository. Okay, now let's move to the main branch. And in the main branch, we have this publish.
Before you move forward, there is a question in the chat. Can you answer it? It's from Rohit. We have requirement to copy data from lake to another lake. What connector can we use for the latest change of data? CDC in previous model, can we use it?
Okay, so for the copy data from lake to lake, you can use, so you have the copy data, a source, you need to create a data set. So you can use here Azure Data Lake Generation 2. It depends on the file that you have. Let's say the limited text, a link service. You add here the file system. Let's say demo. You can add it like that based on your need. Then a sync, and for the sync, you do the same. New Azure Data Lake Storage Generation 2, and the limited text, link service. I will add it like this, but you need to change. And that's all. So if you want to transfer from Azure Data Lake to Azure Data Lake, if I understood correctly. If you need to perform some transformations, then you need to use the data flow. So if you have an Avro file in the data lake and you want to do something with it, or a JSON, again, you need a data flow.
Yeah, great. I think that you answered that question fully.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so going back to the repository, we perform these changes and we want to publish them. We'll publish to the Git repository, and as I mentioned, we have this ADF pipeline, ADF publish pipeline that is automatically created. It was created before because I've also run it, and it contains the ARM templates. So here we have only global parameters and linked templates in the first part, then the template for factory and the template parameters for factory.json. These two files are very, very important, and I will show you in the last, I think it's the last tip, how to import and export the data. So this is a JSON file, nothing else. Just a second, because it's still publishing. Publish branch ADF publish, the pipelines, the datasets. Okay, the ARM template for factory, it was changed just now. So it was updated with the publish that I performed. Okay, let's go back to the presentation. So this is how you set up, how you work with the repository actually, because I haven't added exactly how you set up the repository, but this is how you work with the repository. Okay, let's move next. The last tip, it's the last. If you have multiple, if you have actually a data factory instance, but you want to migrate to another Azure data factory, you don't need to recreate the pipelines, the data sets, the link services, and so on and so forth. You just need to use the ARM templates. And you can either export from here or you have them in the repository. But for the purpose of this session, I added the classical way, let's say the standard way. And here under the Manage tab, you have this import on Azure Portal and also export. First, you click on export and you will export those two ARM templates, those two JSON files that I have shown earlier. And I added also here, yes, the ARM template for factory JSON. This one is the most important. When you want to import, so if in the previous slide I click on export and I exported them, then in the new data factory, I will click on this import on Azure portal. This will redirect you to the Azure portal, and you have an option build your own template in the editor. And here you can load your file, you can load the JSON file. But pay attention, because if your old data factory has a name and your new data factory has another name, you need to change it. Then you can do, so you have here an edit template where you uploaded this ARM template for factory JSON, and you have also the edit parameters where you uploaded the parameters for factory JSON. Again, with the parameters, you should do the same thing to ensure that the two data factories have the same name. Then you need to add the subscription, the resource group, region, factory name, and the connection strings. If you forget to change the name of the data factory and they do not have the same name, you will end up with this error. Otherwise, you can just create and check your new ADF. It will contain all the pipelines. So this is the import, export from one data factory to another data factory. And this is the presentation. But I'm here for questions or any other things that you may want to discuss.
Great presentation. We do have questions all the time. It's very active. We have two questions that are open now. I don't know how to pronounce the name, but it's YKU. He asked about how to do XML validation against the XSL. You can read the whole question now on the chat. And we have another request after it. Can you share your LinkedIn URL? Probably people will want to contact you after it.
Sure, definitely. Just a second. So this is my LinkedIn. I added here in the chat. You can contact me anytime. It will be
Awesome.
great to discuss.
Sure.
Can
you check the question regarding the XML validation?
Yes, for the XML, you can use a data flow as far as I know. Let me check in Data Factory. So me add a new data flow.
You're not presenting anything. If you want to present something for the answers,
okay,
so share your
sorry.
screen.
Okay. So I'm checking here. Exactly. So this is a data flow. Let's suppose we have in the data lake, and we have here XML. And we have a link service. Again, we will add a file path. And this is it. And I think it should be inline data set. You can add here XML. You can add the link service. Oh, but I don't have right now an XML. What it should work like this. Again, I suggest using the data flow. If you have the XML, most likely you have a lot of transformations, and you can directly insert in, let's say, CSV file, Azure SQLDB, and so on and so forth.
Okay, you have a lot of thank you in the chat. So I want to thank you as well. Thanks, Iuliana, for great session. By the way, I really love the way that you present and you move between the presentation, the theory, to the demo, forward and back. It's very good. And I want to thank all the audience, everyone that joined us today. Don't forget to register to the Future Data Driven Summit. I even added it in the QR in my camera, as you can see, but you also have the link in the chat. So thank you a lot for coming to the session, and we will see you next week in our next meetup. You are welcome to open your camera, everyone, if you want to show yourself, or if you have another questions. So let's use the opportunity that Iuliana with us. But thanks a lot, everyone. Let's give them a few more seconds to see if there is a question that need to be. Oh, there is questions. There are more questions coming. Okay, can you follow the question now, or you want me to read it? There was a question, can you have access to the recording? So this is to me. The answer is yes. We publish all the recording, assuming everything is fine, but in theory, it can take one day, usually at the most, or several minutes sometimes. Just follow us on the social media. We will publish the link. Another question. Any plan on the Fabric session by you? I'm not sure what you mean. You mean any plan for us, the community, to present a Fabric session? You can open your camera and explain. Sajawi, it's your question. I'm not sure if it's for me, for the community, or for Iuliana. I can tell you, okay, I don't know exactly what the question means, but I can tell you that in the Future Data Driven Summit that I mentioned several times, we will have about 5 sessions regarding Fabric. After all, Fabric is the hot topic today. More question that we have here is how to do XML validation against SSD. This is for you. I don't know the answer either.
Just a second, just to check it a little bit, and I can tell you. They test it a little bit with the copy, and we have it. Let me share my screen because I forgot to do that again. Okay, well, so if you don't have that much transformations, you can use the copy data. And you can use it to validate because you have the XML here, and I think it automatically validates that in the copy data activity. And the sync, let's suppose it's like that, and you can validate, and afterwards, so you validate, you copy into a path, and then you can take it with the data flow. This is how I see it right now, but I'm not sure because I haven't tested like this.
I don't think that this is the question. The question is not, as I understand, it's not about validate the XML as an XML, but validate the XML against the XSL.
To validate that the XML is that the schema is correctly. I think you can just need to add here the connector. I can test and somehow get back, so I will do that. And
okay, if
have
you
a better
have
answer.
more info in this, you can send us and we will add it to the information that we publish after the event.
Sure, definitely. Let me just take a note of the question. I think it's this one.
I think that there is an answer from UKU. He provided a link.
Okay, thank you. I will check it.
Okay, so go over the link.
How is
Probably
done
it gives you.
in SSIS? Yes, but it might be a little bit different. I know what you mean in SSIS.
I did mention before, and I will say it now in voice. I wrote it in the chat that at least I see it like this. The Azure Data Factory, it's actually the equivalent for the SSIS in the cloud. So basically, it's not one to one, but it's for the same exact task. So everything that you have done in SSIS, if you want to do in the cloud, check this session, everything that Lilian explained, the Azure Data Factory is the solution. Okay, if we don't have any more questions, so we will close the session. And again, thank you. Great lecture.
Thank you very much.
Bye bye all.
Bye.